Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to speak with Shelley today. She is a nurse, digital health professional, chronic illness advocate who's helping other clinicians reclaim their health, careers, and joy. After navigating her own journey with Lyme disease and burnout, she's made the courageous decision to step away from traditional clinical roles and support other nurses and neurodivergent professionals in finding better balance, financial growth, and fulfillment. Whether that means pivoting into non-clinical roles or making peace with where they are, Shelley is here to help. We're talking about healing, identity, what support really looks like over time, and how to build a life that works for you and your body instead of against it. So let's get into it. Welcome, Shelley. I'm so happy that you're here and that you reached out.
Thank you, Lizzie. It's really great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Me too. And I just want to say thank you for taking this time and feeling comfortable sharing such a vulnerable and personal story. I know it's a scary process, but if you've gone through this journey, you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom to share. So I'm excited for the rest of the world to hear. How did your experience with Lyme begin?
Oh, my journey began, gosh, it was a little over 5 years ago. I had an unknown cluster of symptoms or an undiagnosed cluster of symptoms that I just kind of brushed off for most of my life. Fatigue, the pain, muscle pain, joint pain, brain fog. The symptoms progressively were getting worse and worse each year of my life. And I remember there was a day, this was after I had made the transition from clinical nursing. I was in a non-clinical role working from home. And I was in so much pain that I was having trouble even sitting upright in my chair at my desk, at my work from home job. And I think it was that moment when it really hit me that this is not normal. Everyone is not walking around feeling this way. Something is going on. Something is wrong. As crazy as life is, I shortly thereafter met someone who was diagnosed with Lyme disease and had been in treatment for, I think it was a couple of years at that point. Shout out to Elizabeth. She definitely was an important person in the early years of my journey, but I met with her and got to talking to her about my symptoms. We were comparing notes, and this was actually a friend of a friend that I was connected to, and our mutual friend. She came to me and she said, Shelley, I think you need to talk to Elizabeth. She has a lot of the same symptoms that you do. I think it might be helpful. And I kind of begrudgingly went to Elizabeth and in my mind I was like, nobody's ever going to understand what I'm going through. It's impossible. And in any case, I did initiate that conversation, and Elizabeth convinced me that I had Lyme disease. She also shared a lot of resources with me, and that's really where my journey began. I started on the Western medicine side. I did the ELISA, which probably for most people comes back negative. It came back negative for me. I then did a Western blot at, I think it was an integrative um, provider, a clinic in Los Angeles where I was living, and that did come back positive. So we were right, and that's really where my journey began.
And that's such a bittersweet, I feel like, diagnosis, right? On one hand, you're like, dang, I didn't want anything to be wrong. But on the other hand, you can feel something's wrong. And it's so good to get answers at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to describe it. That moment was such a strange mix of overwhelm and relief simultaneously. Seeing the lab results on that piece of paper, I think I tested positive for, I want to say it was like it's like 4 bands or 5 bands, but it wasn't the right one. So I also wasn't, I was positive, but I wasn't CDC positive, which was also a whole thing that I had heard about and that I had spoken to Elizabeth about. And that relief of like, okay, first of all, I'm not crazy. I was right. Something was wrong. And thank God I listened to my body and I pursued my curiosity. But also, now what? Now what do I even do?
Totally. And that's such an overwhelming place to be in. So, what did those early stages look like for you? How did you navigate that?
It was really messy. Did join a support group. I think one of the first things I did was, of course, I went to Google and I also looked for a support group. This was also in 2020, so it was COVID times. And I think I got my diagnosis and it was December 2019, or I shouldn't say diagnosis. I got my lab results in end of 2019. And then COVID, of course, was the following March. And I started treatment at that same time. But in any case, it was really messy. I did start working with the provider out in Los Angeles, and then started doing remote treatment because I went back to Michigan to stay with family, and um, also trying to navigate, do I tell my family who I didn't have healthy relationships with what's safe for me to say? And there's a lot of misinformation. So how am I going to navigate these conversations? And then, as I mentioned just a minute ago, I did also look for support groups, which I thankfully did find a really great support group in Project Lyme. And so I started attending their virtual meetings that they had several times a week. And that's where I really got plugged into a community. And I started meeting other people with Lyme all across the US, but also there were people in that group who are in other countries, and this is all over the world. And I think having that support in those early stages, it was so important. I'm so glad I did that, because just going to the meetings and knowing that I'm not alone and I'm not the only one going through this, and I do have people to talk to, and that level of visibility to this disease that is otherwise so invisible in many cases, it was such a great support system in those early days.
I'm so happy that you had that support, and I feel like you really hit the nail on the head with invisible illness. It is such a challenging, not only like term, but condition to navigate, because how do you describe something that's invisible to most people? Invisible to the eye, and they can't feel it. Your life on the outside probably did look normal for the most part, especially during COVID, everyone's remote. Like, that's such a challenge, that I think any stage you kind of face, but especially early on, it's just overwhelming. I remember how little or how few, people understand, I guess.
I think that was one of the hardest parts. I think at some point in those early days, I had this idea that, people are going to rally and I'm going to have so much support. And it actually wasn't that way. And I think that invisibility piece has a lot to do with it. I, on the outside, looked like a very normal, healthy person that is just complaining that she's tired. And I think that's something that anyone with Lyme or many other, invisible or chronic illnesses can relate to, that in itself is so mentally debilitating, because I kind of had to feel, I was kind of made to feel like I had to defend myself, and
Yes.
I had to defend that no, something is wrong and I'm not making this up. And that was something that really, really kind of blew me away, and not, I was not prepared for that.
Nor I remember that for myself as well, and I still experience that, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you do as well. Like, almost you feel like by other people's reaction, it's almost like gaslighting yourself. You're like, "Do I actually feel bad? Hang on, am I being dramatic?" You're like, "No, no." Sometimes I have to remind myself. I'll look at, you know, remind myself of the symptoms or the results or whatever and be like, "Okay, yeah, this is real. Like, I'm still experiencing this."
Yeah, that's so true. And to your point, I still have those days, and it is a mental game, because you have those good days and you're like, you just forget that you're sick or that you have this condition. And then the flare hits, or you have a bad day, and then you're like, oh, no, 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 no. I really do have this thing. It hasn't gone away. It's
That
not
was
in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, totally. So how did this diagnosis impact your work as a nurse and your identity in that workspace?
It's been a really interesting journey career wise. When I left direct patient care. I think I was at it for probably maybe 6 or 7-ish years, something like that. And I completely burned out. And I think that was kind of a different layers of issues. I think I burned out because it was nursing and because of the demands of the role itself and the lack of safeguards that were in place from a professional perspective. I think a lot of healthcare professionals experience this, unfortunately. Shorter patient times, very high patient volume, waking up. Gosh, I remember one of the last days where I was like, okay, something's got to change. There was a day I was working at a surgery center and there were 18 cases scheduled for the day. I was scheduled to open. The first case was at 4 o'clock, and I had to be there at 3 a.m. because you have to be there an hour early to open the surgery center, prep for the day. Whatever prep hasn't been done the night before, you've got to prep the cases, and then you don't know what time you're going home. And it was kind of severely sudden for me, and it wasn't too long after that. I really woke up and was like, I can't I can't go on. I couldn't get out of bed. At that point in time, I didn't know that I had Lyme disease, which was an additional layer on top of that, which I know now. And I can look back in hindsight and think, wow, like I really burned myself out the extra mile, not knowing that I had this illness. And in hindsight, it makes so much more sense. Not that the work environments that was in were healthy otherwise. I mean, there were others who were struggling, but they were also able to manage in a way that I simply could not. So I think that was the complicated piece. And when I was thinking about making a change in my career, the only thing I had in my mind was I need to work from home. Like this is going to give me the rest I need. I don't know if it's going to fix everything, but I need to work from home. And at that time, I mean, this is like over like 10 plus years ago now, like working remotely as a healthcare professional was rare. Like now there are all kinds of digital health startups and there are different ways you can get yourself in the door and have a remote work environment. But I kept at it, and I did eventually start working remotely as a fertility nurse, which is my background. I've been in the fertility space throughout my career. So I got a foot in the door and found myself in this crazy startup world that I quickly fell in love with. And I've been in that space for uh, now probably, if I'm doing the math right, maybe 7 or 8 years. And only about 3 months ago did I make another transition where I have stepped away from full time. Um, Roles and I am now working for myself as a consultant. So I work directly with women's health companies as a consultant. I get to leverage my clinical experience. And then the other piece of what I do is what you touched on earlier, career consulting directly with other nurses and clinicians to help them navigate making similar changes.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've been able to make such big changes because I think burnout without autoimmune conditions is a challenging thing, let alone when you're undiagnosed with Lyme or battling invisible illness. It just takes so much more energy to even match what other people's output can be? So then, yes, like you said, they're probably also burning out. But if they imagine they weren't, right, it still takes that much energy for you to match, to show up every day, to get out of bed, to do the basic things. And
Absolutely. I can see now in hindsight the work, the level of effort I put in to do the same task that someone else was doing was way higher. And I think I had questioned that for most of my life that, why am I so tired all the time? Where is this coming from? Like, I don't think other people feel this way. And then when I got out of nursing school and I started working and was more in a professional setting, I noticed that certain tasks would take me longer, or I felt I could kind of feel the difference in energy that I was putting in compared to something that looked so easy to someone else. And that contrast, in addition to, I think, the symptoms progressing over the years, I think is ultimately what led to that moment of me not being able to sit upright in a chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you touch on a little bit more how working remote, how that transition was, how it impacted your health and your healing journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was amazing. I think I have heard over the years conversations from other people, other colleagues about having a difficult time transitioning to remote work. I did not have a hard time. I freaking loved it. It was so easy for me to transition. The amount of physical and mental relief that I felt like from day one was incredible. Being able to guard my energy and still do good work, manage my time, manage my environment. I was using a lot less social, mental energy, the physical stress, not being on my feet all day with undiagnosed Lyme disease. I mean, it was a total game changer.
Yeah, I can relate. I think remote working is the best thing ever.
It really is.
Yeah, and something that maybe you can relate to as well. After I went remote, even knowing physically I could go in person now, I don't trust it. I've had family, I've had friends who've gone in person because they can, right? And then their work building is moldy or something, and then they relapse, and it's not the company's policy to cover all of that, of course, but then it kind of puts you right back into the toxic environment you left.
I think so too. And there's a lot of conversation in recent years about, do you work from home? Do you return to office? I think having the option of remote work is so incredibly necessary. Yeah, if I had the option to maybe go hybrid, I might consider like a day or two in office, but the benefits for someone with a health condition like this to work remote is you just can't have that quality of life going into an office where you're not only managing yourself, but you're also having to manage other people in an office setting. Like I remember one of the clinics I worked at, I was all of the nurses sat next to each other in one room. There were constantly phones going off. I was getting pulled away from my desk, getting up, sitting back down, and then having to deal with other people's emotional energy on top of that. Not having that, I think you you don't realize how much energy it takes out of you until I didn't know until I experienced being at home and being able to give all of that energy back to myself. And I think that is when I really began my healing journey, even though I was still undiagnosed at that time. And I was for many years after that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something to be said for emotional and mental load. Absolutely. For anyone. But again, also while you're in this space, like you're already carrying a lot of your own and there's no room for more. Yeah. So talk about a little bit more when you were diagnosed. So you took the Lyme test back in December 2019, you got those results, moved remote, and then you were diagnosed years later, you say?
I was never officially diagnosed in the Western medicine sense. I did get the test results back. That was in December of 19. And then I was working with an integrative or holistic clinic or provider out in Los Angeles. And we did begin treatment protocol right at that time. It was, it was complete insanity. And I'm sure you can relate. Anyone who has been through something like this, that it takes many doctors and an insane amount of energy just to like go to a doctor's appointment and then to make sense of what they're talking about. It was like learning a new language. The first doctor that I was working with very much took the throw everything and the kitchen sink at you approach, and I burned out from that. And I think I am still recovering mentally and physically from that treatment and that mindset, that approach. I did that and I tried many different treatment modalities. And I mean, gosh, there was a point when I was taking 40 pills a day. I mean, I spent all my money, I spent all my savings, which is, I think, another thing that people don't understand from the outside is there are very slim chances that your Lyme disease is going to be covered by any sort of insurance, and all of this is out of pocket. I was talking to a friend just earlier this week, and we were talking about medical and finances, and I think in hindsight, I have spent probably about $60,000 in the last 5 years. I mean, and that's like on the friendly side of things. Like, like I got it good. So that was rough. That being my first experience, I think at that point in time, I was trying really hard to stay organized. I had my big giant binder and I would try to take my notes and keep up with things, but I was managing everything. I didn't have a lot of support in that sense of, someone to go with me to doctor's appointments or, try to make sense of lab results. So I really was doing my best and had some level of confidence being a healthcare professional myself that, okay, maybe I can manage it. But the first 6 months, 7 months, 8 months went by and I was completely worn down. I wasn't able to keep up with all of the notes and the symptom tracking. And that's when, in those early stages, that the support group really came through because it gets really dark really fast. And, after that experience with that doctor, I then moved. I worked with a couple of other doctors, none of them who I really trusted. I've tried so many different treatments. I did like protein peptides, antibiotics, antifungals. I did the SOT, two different SOT therapies. The first one was successful in the sense that I was like symptom free for the first time in my life. That lasted for about 2 months. And let me tell you, I did everything in those 2 months. I lived it up. And then I went back for another one and I actually felt a lot worse than I did before the first one. So after that, I really took a step back. And this is all over the course of about 4 years. And after that, I really took a step back to just kind of recompose myself from all of the chaos, all of the financial hardship and the stress of it all, and gave myself some time off, which, I still have, as you probably know, dietary lifestyle changes that those are lifelong now. So I don't, in my mind, they're not treatment, but I was keeping up with those things. But that's where I've been for, gosh, we're in 2025 now. That's probably where I've been for about the last year and a half to 2 years, is keeping myself on a maintenance mode. I think one thing that I didn't know at the beginning of this journey was how much it would change every aspect of my life, how much I would learn to trust myself, how much I would learn to let go of people and things in my life that were once so normal. I was saying goodbye to people left and right, and that still happens. I think it is unfortunately something we have to experience, but now, a little over 5 years in, I do think it's for the best. Those spaces have now been filled with really wonderful people and wonderful experiences. And I'm at a place now where I do feel comfortable, like, okay, I'm gonna take my time. I do believe in remission, and I think that's possible for me. I'm not there yet. I'll believe it when the tinnitus stops. That's my target, but I can function. I can function really well. I have a much higher quality of life now, especially that I've moved abroad. I'm now in Europe, and I've made a lot of permanent lifestyle changes that keep me going. So knowing how to live on a day-to-day basis and how to manage my energy, how much can I do in a day? I think the exhausting thing is the constant math of the energy that does wear on me, certainly, and it probably will continue to do so for a long time. But I think the biggest thing I've taken away is knowing what I need and feeling more comfortable trusting myself and advocating for myself, even if no one else understands.
That's beautiful. There are so many things I want to touch on there real quick, but I'll just do two before my next question. First of all, thank you for sharing. That made me very emotional to listen to not only on such a deep level to that, trusting yourself to letting go of everything pretty much that you knew, whether it's in that moment or later you realize you have to let it go. It's quite a process. And also what you mentioned about the first round of treatment where it was so intense, it burned you out, you were turned against. I had the same story. And I think for other people who also, I'm sure if this is your first experience and your first time going through treatment, you don't know what to look for in a doctor. You don't know the questions to ask. And it's very easy to end up in that situation, but there are other options. And I think it's also very encouraging and eye opening, honestly, into this industry to hear a medical professional say how overwhelming and taxing it is because it's not just someone who doesn't understand the healthcare system. Like you worked so deeply in that, and it's
Yeah.
too much.
That in itself was really difficult for me to come to terms with. I honestly felt like it was a slap in the face that I'm a nurse. I I know the language. I know how to speak for for patients with providers, and I can, I should be able to keep myself organized. I should be able to advocate for myself, but I couldn't. I don't know. It makes sense to me now, but being your own caretaker and your own patient, it is doing the impossible and breaks my heart to think about how we all have to do that.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, it's definitely shows how broken the system is if it's not helping anyone really in that way. But moving on, you mentioned a lot of lifestyle changes, one of those being a move to Europe. I would love to learn a little bit about what those changes are and how you decided to move abroad, how that's impacted you, and this whole phase of your life.
Yeah, this is really exciting. It's a newer development in my journey. And I'll just kind of back up a little bit. As far as lifestyle changes, the main changes that I made that worked for me, this is not medical advice, y'all. I switched to all organic foods whenever possible. It's not always possible, but I do my best. I cut out caffeine, I cut out alcohol, I cut out sugar. And I will say I'm at a place now where I can every once in a while indulge. I have to deal with the consequences, but I do indulge and I can from time to time now, which thank God, because I feel like as I'm getting older, like my sweet tooth is just getting stronger and stronger.
Don't need that times.
Gosh, it's soul food, sugar, really. So those were the bigger changes. I have been vegetarian for a long time, but it was actually shortly after I had moved to LA, I cut out dairy because I became severely lactose intolerant. So that was something that I already had in place. If I had to introduce that at the same time of all of this, like, I don't know how I would have managed. But thankfully that was already second nature to me. And now there are so many products and substitute food items available, readily available that I never found it to be really an issue as far as cutting out dairy. So as far as diet and lifestyle, I became very serious about hydration and also exercise. Exercise was very difficult for me for a long time. Prior to, we'll call it diagnosis, I was extremely active, always hiking, always running, some kind of marathon on the calendar for the next year. I had to let go of all of that and I really started from scratch in terms of what I was physically able to do. So I did what I could in terms of physical activity. I leaned on yoga, I leaned on meditation and going for walks. Walking became my best friend. And as I slowly started to rebuild strength throughout those early treatment years, I started traveling again, which is also something that I did a lot of as, growing up and also as an adult. And I started to return to that and just trying to enjoy life again. That started to become possible very slowly. And I had to go about it in a different way because when I was younger, I did a lot of short trips. I would go on, like a weekend trip. Okay, I'm going to fly to wherever for 3, 4 days. And I didn't have the energy to do that anymore. I mean, I wanted to travel, but it wiped me out. So in this new stage, what I started doing was long and slow travel, as I call it. So I was working remotely. I would take my work, I would take my laptop with me to different places. Spent a month in Mexico. I spent a month in Portugal. I spent a month in 2 months in the UK. I went to Italy. I did a lot of traveling in this kind of slow way. So what I would do is I would book a place for 1 month, apartment or Airbnb, and I would build a life in each of these places. So I would have a gym, I would have a yoga studio, I knew where the grocery store was, I had resources nearby, and I very much like took my routine back from back home to this new place. And then in the evenings and weekends when I had the energy, I would go out and be a tourist and meet people and explore. So over this process in the last this has been like the last 3 to 4 years now that I've been doing this. I noticed how different I felt in my body when I was out here versus back in the US. And I didn't believe it the first time. I didn't believe it the second time because in my mind, I was like, well, everybody feels this way when they're traveling. It's just excitement. It's just adrenaline. I'm just having, I'm just happy to be here. Then I did it the third time and the fourth time. And I was like, wait a minute. I can have dairy. Like, my stomach doesn't hurt anymore. My daily pain goes from a 4 to a 1. What is going on? And I started to really think about it. Is this something that I could do, that I want to do? Where do I go? How do I make this happen? And I decided to, I still didn't believe myself, so I did it again. And then it was the first time that I went to Italy. It was one of the last times I did like a slow travel month. And that's when it really dawned on me that, I need to move and this is going to give me a quality of life that's not attainable to me back in the US, that I wish it was. So that's kind of where that decision came from. I think, the quality of food in some of the European countries, of course, is higher in many regards. You could ask me the science behind it, and I don't know what to tell you. I just know that when I'm here, my stomach doesn't hurt. I know I've read like research papers on this, but to me, it just doesn't matter because I know this is what works for me. But I think the way that life is set up in many cities here, being walkable cities where you don't have to rely on a car, I'm walking a lot more. I don't have to plan my exercise so much. That the daily stress of how am I going to manage myself and my symptoms and manage my treatment, even though I'm not technically in treatment? All of that stress is significantly lower because it's kind of built into my daily routine. And also because I'm walking around more, I'm getting more vitamin D. It's this really, in my brain, I think of it as a more biodynamic way of life. I don't know if that's a proper word. I may have just made it up, but that's how I think of it. And I think that is part of the reason why I do so much better out here. I do also think that there's something to be said about our infamous hustle culture in the US and the impact that has on our brains and bodies, immune systems that, if you don't know any better, you don't know that, it could be causing issues. So, and I think that, for people like us who are part of this club that we don't want to be a part of, you just become so much more sensitive to your surroundings and you do pick up on these things, and so that's where the decision was made, and I'm very happy to say it's been a few months now, and I'm very confident that I made the right decision.
I'm so glad that you did.
Thank you.
And that's such a big decision and realization, which I understand doubting yourself. In case there is any other doubt, want to just add, I recently in the fall moved back from living full time in Costa Rica, and that was the first thing I noticed is the food. I immediately felt terrible. And I eat all organic, same things. Like I don't drink, I eat healthy, reduce my sugar and caffeine and everything. And I've been here now about 9 months, and finally I am just starting to feel like myself because of that reason. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's not just you at all.
it's so real and really unfortunate.
Yeah.
making a move abroad for any length of time is it's not possible for everyone with Lyme disease. I'm stretching my resources very thin by making this decision, but I also trust that this is the best thing for my health and for my body, for my longevity, and that, you know, I'm going to be paying off medical bills for a while. So, if I'm going to do that in the US, in my mind, I'm fine to do it here too. But not everyone has the means to do something like this. And it's really unfortunate because I think back on all of the people that I met over the last 4 or 5 years who have shared their journeys with me about Lyme, and I wish that they could have this experience, but it's just not feasible for everyone. I mean, it's hardly feasible for me. I'm just stubborn.
I get it. You've touched on many of the reasons why, but the accessibility is honestly what drove me to start this company because not many people have those resources, and everyone should have that information and should have that option when it's not their fault the systems don't support that. So what would I don't know if you have any, but what do you have any advice or insight to wellness and lifestyle changes in the US that either you did make or you kind of wish you had made in hindsight?
I think those lifestyle changes, the dietary changes especially that I mentioned, those were honestly more of a game changer for me than probably any of the actual medical treatments or protocols that I tried. Of everything, it was those lifestyle changes, the sugar, alcohol, caffeine, switching to organic. I mean, the all of those things, I don't think I can reduce it to any one of those things that made a difference. I think it's a collective, a cumulative effect. And I think that's like another reason why life out here works well for me is all of those things are at play. It's like I remember I was talking to someone about the Blue Zones documentary and they were telling me about like, oh, I'm gonna start eating like purple yams or something so I could live longer. And in my mind, I'm like, that's not
That's not how it works.
like that's just so reductive.
Yes.
I mean, you could eat purple yams living in the US, but it's not going to fix the fact that you know, the quality of food or the stress levels or you know, all of the other things. So I think, in any case, to answer your question, those lifestyle changes, I think, um, made a really big impact. They weren't as hard of an adjustment as I thought. I remember very early on when I decided to stop drinking. Um, I thought it was going to be so hard. It was not. I just stopped and then I never missed it. I was like, "Oh, I'm also saving a lot of money. Like, this is great. No hangovers." Yeah, absolutely. But I remember that moment because there was, like, some social anxiety of, like, "Well, oh, what are people gonna think? Like, how am I gonna go out and, like, not drink?" Like, that felt like such a big deal, but then when I actually did it, I was like, "Nobody really cares." And then the people who did care, I didn't really wanna be in their company anyway, so it all just kind of washed out.
Yeah. I think that's a very real stigma and like mental block that I myself faced as well, but many others because you want to fit in, you want to do these things. And I think with diagnoses like this, unfortunately, it's just a learning curve of like, yeah, you're not ever going to fit in that way in many regards. And just letting that concept go of like being normal, I think is the
Yeah.
process.
I think that's such a great, like, way to sum it up. If I could go back and give myself any advice in those early days, I don't know exactly what I would say. Didn't know it was gonna be this transformative. I didn't know it was gonna be this lonely. I didn't know that it was going to be also, the very beginning of a complete unraveling. I mean, there's, as you know, so many layers to this. Like, now that I am this many years into the process, I can see that starting with Lyme and all of that, those early years, and like Lyme was the very beginning of a very small piece of a much larger unraveling and transformation on so many different levels. It wasn't just physical for me, it was social, it was mental and spiritual. And, I moved to the other side of the world and I have a completely different set of people in my life. Like, there's what is the movie? Like, it's like the Inside Out or Upside Down or something. Like, yeah, it's like that. Like, your life is completely going to change. And I don't know if I could say anything to me 5 years ago, I don't know. I think I just like give her a hug and be like, let it change. It's all for the best. It's gonna suck so hard, but let it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Man, well, okay, I feel like
Have we
I have
gotten off topic?
no, 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 this is great. I love that's the beauty of these conversations. They can go wherever we need them to go.
Your questions are so good, and I haven't. I think talking about this with someone who gets it, it's pretty cathartic.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for this space, and I just hope that like you creating this space for people like me to share their stories and like the work that you put into this. I never imagined 5 years ago that I would ever get to a place where I would feel comfortable talking to anybody in this capacity. And I'm grateful that I am, but also if I could pay it forward in any way, I want to do that. And this is such a great way to hopefully make a difference.
You have, and thank you so much for sharing. I feel like this was definitely one of the more powerful conversations I've had recently around this. Again, because you've lived this experience, there is definitely a shared understanding that not many have. And yeah, I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing your lessons, the struggles, everything in this because it's not a start and stop like story, right? It continues, but I'm glad that you're through the worst of it and able to provide that wisdom for people who are just starting on that journey because it's a process.
It's a process. No,
Yeah,
thank you so much. And yeah, it's a process, like you said. I don't know, I believe in remission, like I said, and I don't know where in my journey that falls. Is it going to be a year from now? Is it going to be 5 years from now? But I know that it's possible. I've seen it, and research is increasing, funding is increasing, and I'm really hopeful that in this lifetime we'll have some really serious options in terms of treatments and
totally.
research. I think it's slow, but it's happening. And, it does help when you have people who are high profile and they share their experiences. Unfortunately, us little people don't always make the news.
Yeah, little by little, for anyone who's listening or watching to this, there are as you've heard through this whole conversation, there's lots of hurdles and expenses and logistics to figure out, but lifestyle changes are something that's within your control to change. And I think, Shelley, you touched on this really well earlier. The most important when you're looking at lifestyle changes is the holistic view. You can't just take one piece and say, I'm just going to eat these vegetables and that's going to cure me, right? It's the whole picture because it's that what was the term you made up? The biodiverse.
Biodynamic.
Right, you want a biodynamic environment for yourself, right? You have to provide that, and you can't do
However
that
that works.
with off choices.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it really is. It's like that. And I think on the hard days when I have a flare, that's what I try to remind myself of is, okay, maybe I need to be in bed most of the day today and I can't go for a walk, but can I still drink the water that I need to drink? Can I still eat well and nutritious and get the right type of food in my system? And you just kind of learn to somehow do what you can, even if that's a little bit. Those incremental little actions, they all add up. And then you have days where you're doing everything. Those are good days.
Those are the days to celebrate for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Shelley. I think that we've covered most big topics for this conversation. There's always more. You're welcome to come back. But thank you again for taking this time to share your story and again share that wisdom and insight. And if anyone listening wants to reach out or work with you, I'll make sure to like link her information below. And Shelley, I'll get that from you. Anything that
perfect.
you want
Okay.
to share. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. No, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And again, thank you for having this space, having me. And, I've been listening to your podcast and it's been helpful to me. So I'm just grateful to be here on the other side speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.